Thank you so much, Mark. But a fiery session you had there, having to deal with all those political issues. All right, now let's do business. And that's, of course, what Mark said is part of what we'll be discussing. So let's start from the oil space, shall we? Global space, we see that the prices edged low on Tuesday, breaking a 5-day streak of gains as markets refocused on concerns about demand after OPEC Plus yesterday. They cut their forecast for demand growth in 2024 because of softer expectations in China. We'll take a look at the numbers right there. We see global benchmark of Brent. Yes, it's in the red. Can you imagine almost 1% cut in just a session? This is for the features, 0.95%. So even though oil had broken this time yesterday, we're below $80. But now we see that it had hit $80 and above, but then we've lost almost 1% to $81.52 a barrel. WTI at $79.33, also losing almost 1%, 0.91. And Brent had gained more than 3% yesterday after we met, but U.S. crude futures had risen about 4%, even much more than that. And yes, OPEC yesterday, they released their forecast and also the reports for August, which tells us the numbers for July. And of course, we'll talk about that later on. So OPEC cuts their 2024 forecast. This for the first time that it was made in July 2023 and comes after mounting signs that demand in China has lagged expectations due to slumping diesel consumption as well as crisis in the property sector, which has hampered the world's second largest economy. Markets are preparing, counting down to tomorrow. United States Consumer Price Index is set to be out. And of course, that's a crucial read of inflation that will tell investors what the Fed will do next. Money markets have already betting in about 25 to 50 basis points cuts by September. Total easing of 100 basis points this year, 2024. Of course, we will see how that goes. Now, out of that OPEC's meeting yesterday, Nigeria's crude oil production went up, according to OPEC, to 1.3 million. Well, we are grateful for these things, per day. That was the number for July. It went from 1.27 to 1.3 recorded in June. That's according to, that latest monthly oil market report. The 30,000 barrels per day increase in output comes as OPEC cuts, of course, the global oil demand forecast for the year. So we'll see what that will mean for us. Nigeria's oil rig, however, it fell to 14 in the month of July from 15 in June. We hope to have a conversation on that and find out how this is going to affect the issue of crude availability, which the domestic refiners are discussing these days. And talking about local refiners now, including Dangote Refinery, they've raised their crude oil demand to 597,000 barrels per day for the next 5 months. And this marks a significant increase from the 483,000 barrels per day required in the first half of 2024. According to the Nigerian Upstream Petroleum Regulatory Commission, that's the NUPRC, oil companies managed to supply 177,777 barrels every day for the first half of the year. That's far below what even the PIA has said should be given to local refiners. Well, the gap between rising demand and insufficient supply has caused tensions between the 650,000 barrel per day Dangote refinery as well as other refiners in the country. We'll settle on that, but first of all, let's tell you how the Naira did yesterday. We're still in a positive mood for the Naira. We see it does a gain on NAFEM, 0.20%. The Naira opened at 1,574 Naira 20 kobo, but closed at 1,570 Naira 99 kobo. Of course, the Dutch auction is still on, and we hope it is sustained. But, we still have some unanswered questions about the frequency, the target, and all of that. We hope to hear from the central bank real soon. For NAFEX, it was almost unchanged for the second day. That's what we had yesterday from Friday to Monday. So Monday to Tuesday, also, NAFEX seems to be stabilizing right there. But I can't say the same for the parallel market, which is one of the stories that senior associate with financial derivatives company, Dumebi Oluwale, comes in with. Dumebi, it's been a while since I had you here. I know it's been you you and Ladi. So it's good to let's do the girls thing this morning.
I'm happy to do that.
Great. So we see we've been celebrating that the gap between the Naira, the official market and the parallel market has reduced. I wonder if we should be worried again, because we see since last week, since they started the Dutch auction system, we've seen in the official market the Naira gaining, but in the parallel market, which we would say is more accessible because these are to the banks mostly, the Naira has been dropping. Yesterday too, it also dropped in spite of the fact that we had an increase or a gain on the official market.
I mean, some of these things are pretty much expected, right? So you can think of it like low supply causing the price to increase, because now demand is being met to end users through the official market. But then again, if you actually look at where the parallel market rate was before the Dutch auction, which is around 1,622, to what it is right now, you actually see, I think it's about
1,600
Naira. 1,600 to 1,605. So you see that's actually also appreciated. So to some extent, the movement of supply from the official market is also somewhat supporting the parallel market, but maybe not as much as what is going on the demand on the official market side. But more importantly, I think, is to look at the dynamics at play in the FX market right now, and you see that with the reforms that we've taken place, I think when the reforms initially started, I did mention at some point that interventions like this are things that we will see somewhat sparingly, because now we're in a world where the CBN is not expected to intervene subsequently in the market. We're now in a world where it's a willing buyer and willing seller market. So if there's no supply, we'll definitely see the markets react and the prices will go high. But if demand is excess demand and supply is not meeting, we'll also see the exchange rate markets react. And when we see backlogs like this, I mean, from the retail auction report or press release that the CBN shared, we saw like there was a backlog of about $1.1 billion, right? So you see that because of how much that backlog was, the CBN had to step in. So in this world, basically, we'll definitely see more things like this, but not subsequently. The CBN would only intervene in manners like when we're seeing like so much backlog and supply of FX
the backlog is much now. But I think the comforting thing is we've seen FX inflow increase. We've seen our reserve increase. So CBN actually has the power, the purchasing power to intervene at this time, even though it shouldn't be, as you said, a normal thing, the intervention. But we need them. Do we need them to intervene with the BDCs, because they've been doing it through the banks?
Yes, I mean, the CBN, they released a circular that they also sold some dollars to BDCs at some point before this retail auction happened.
Okay,
so we're seeing them step in.
We haven't seen them do the Dutch system with...
So I think this is it. We need to also understand like where the BDCs are placed in the FX market, right? So they definitely supply to myself and you, they supply, So the expectation is that because of how much the backlog was on the commercial banks side, which gives dollars directly to businesses that need it for imports, that will now provide the commodities that myself and you. So at that point in time, you realize that the intervention was very necessary for these businesses because of how significant they are to the overall economy. So to meet like smaller FX demand, I think that they're already doing they're doing good enough with BDCs, and I definitely still see them engage more in supplying BDCs with dollars. But I think it's also important for us to recognize the fact that what the CBN is doing in this position that we are now, and I think I said last time I was here with Ladi, the CBN is doing what it can and what it should in this current climate that we're in. Nigeria has taken up so much reforms that are definitely, hitting people on the side, but it's not one way, right? We do have two parties involved that are running this economy.
I hear you calling out the fiscal authority.
And I'm doing it very boldly today because we cannot sideline the effort that the CBN is taking up, right? And they can only do so much. They only have so much levers to pull. interest rates and interventions when necessary, right, to ensure that prices are stable. We've seen them take these steps, and it's painfully so, right? And so we definitely need more support to what they are doing from the fiscal side. If not, we'll just keep, dancing around.
Well, if we did have this conversation, I would have pushed you to the fiscal side. So you tell us, but let's talk about oil production. We saw a bit of that good news, about 30 barrels per day increase in our production. Certainly good news for us. We hope it's sustained. But can we expect this to trickle down to the local refiners? There's been a lot of issue around that, and Dangote being a giant in the industry, because I know that I've been talking to modular refiners, and they've been complaining, but their voice haven't been heard. It's too low, but Dangote is a giant, so we've been hearing, and it seems it's now that the problem is receiving attention. Can we expect that, for instance, this 2.3% increase in crude, maybe will be channeled to them, because they're even asking for more now? And Port Harcourt refinery is coming up. It's supposed to also be a part of domestic crude consumption.
I mean, I can't say if this 2.34% will trickle down to Dangote or even the modular refineries. But what I will say is, we are now at that point where we cannot do without producing to supply these refineries. We are at the point where Nigeria has become too exposed to global shocks. And if we're not producing enough, we can't even supply our own refineries. Talk more of, thinking of exporting as much, right? So we're at that point where we need to have these conversations, and not just only have the conversations. I think the time for execution and implementation it was since yesterday, right? Or some decade ago. So it's time for us to actually start doing these things and making sure that we are able to refine our own crude and then supply the domestic market, so that the reforms that we've taken, we'll begin to see them actually have the broad-based impact on the economy. Because from an economy standpoint, what you believe, or not what we believe, from numbers and what we have on our expectations, and this is even cutting across other economic agents, right? The expectation is that because we are producing oil, right, we do have functioning refineries. They are not just getting crude and they're not refining as much as they should. We have this somewhat infrastructure in place, and we also have a Dangote. Let us produce enough, sell to them. Right. Let us refine and supply to ourselves.
So the problem maybe is we have obligations, and even the NDPRC had come out to say they can't even meet up with what the PIA has allocated to domestic refiners because of our obligations. We have loans that are backed by crude. So that puts us in a very tight corner.
It does, and that's why we need to address the issues that are making us not produce enough. Because when you think about where Nigeria was in terms of crude oil production, some 20 years ago or some 10 years ago, we were producing up to 2 million barrels per day. And because of that, when you even look at our budgets, right, you see that the government did have the confidence to put an oil production estimate of about 1.8 million barrels per day, 1.7, 1.6, before we started, reducing it, just cutting it down. So what does this tell you? It means we do have that capacity, right? But we're not just doing what we should do to produce that capacity or produce at our optimum capacity. And it's very simple. What is making you not producing up? There's theft, there's vandalism.
But there's a whole lot of effort on dealing with oil theft. You see the Navy, they've arrested, they catch vessels.
So Ini, what this means is that we're not doing enough. It's just that simple. We're not doing enough. And when we understand how critical this resource is to our economy, we need to deploy more. If we're deploying one tank of the Navy, and 10 troops of the Army, we need to do a lot more. Simply because right now we cannot shy away from the fact that our economy is still extremely dependent on this commodity and the effects we get from it, the earnings we get from it. We're still very susceptible to it. Export earning, I think from the Q1 foreign trade report, Nigeria's exports is still. I think crude oil still accounts for over 70% of that. So we cannot avoid the conversation of how Nigeria is.
Totally green.
Exactly. We can't go totally.
Let me ask, because I don't know if you saw the news. I think it was last week or so, where they went to, was it Akwa Ibom State or River State, and illegal refinery sites and things like that. And people ask, isn't it possible to legalize those areas so that we can capture some of those inputs into the legal system?
I mean, I'm not an oil expert, so I would only speak from an economic standpoint. And I do think that it's a conversation that can be had, right? I don't know how effective that would be, but if these illegal refineries are already refining and are already, to some extent, instead of maybe destroying the infrastructure that is already there is a world where we could absorb some of those resources and maybe make them legal. But then again, there are also consequences, right? So I do think that right now with some of these oil production issues that we found ourselves in, there's not enough consequence for some of these things. And it's, even if there are consequences, it's not publicly made. So that's why I think to an extent some of these refineries have still been bold enough to continue. So there's that world where we need to just clean up and sanitize the entire oil production sector for Nigeria to optimally produce.
All right, we're almost out of time,
yes,
but maybe I think we have a bit of good news. And people say, oh, journalists, they feast on the bad news.
Yes.
Tomatoes, pepper, we see the price has tapered a bit.
Yes.
We don't know for how long,
yes,
but it's worth mentioning.
Of course, it's a good thing. I, for one, I'm happy about it.
I know your freezer is stuck at this time.
You
don't want to say.
Oh my.
Let's not go there.
But I mean, it's definitely good news, right? And even though it's not so much that people are not still equipped to so much income to bulk buy as much, but it's definitely some relief on people's incomes. And one of the reasons why this is happening, we can definitely attribute it to, I think, to the harvest season as well. To the harvest season, there's also some level of little respite when it comes to logistics costs actually towards the wholesale market and also the retail market. Then you also consider the fact that I think the federal government, has been quite supportive. I know that from the time of the protest, they released some bags of rice, and so we're also seeing that. We're also seeing some increased activities from like the borders that were reopened earlier in the year. Yes, and also the import duty suspension as well that has already started kicking in. So we're seeing like positive impacts from there. And when you net it off to look at how long that import duty suspension will last, and the federal government, supportive measures in terms of food, we do expect that at least for up until the end of the third quarter of the year, some of these commodities we might be able to see like this price decline sustain.
Yeah, okay. But I mean, for Gary, I mean, I think Mr. Rani did say the other day, so it's the perishables because of the fear of sustained storage.
Yes, and exactly.
So we see, okay, cement is down, that's good news. Tomatoes and pepper have gone down also. But when it comes to the dry commodities, Gary, rice, flour, they're still going up because obviously they can be preserved.
Yes.
All right. Thank you so much for your time. Senior Associate Financial Derivatives Company, Jimmy Bioduwadi.
Thank you.
Let's take a break now. When we come back, have you heard of the circular economy? Are you participating there? We'll talk about it after the break. Stay with us. Welcome back to watching Business Morning on Sunrise Daily. We're discussing the circular economy, where this is an economy that has four concepts. It's reuse, recycle, waste reduction, and product redesign. And sounds like a whole lot of words put together, the but I mean, we can make it our everyday life. Let's find out how Lagos is doing this now with the Special Advisor, Climate Change and Circular Economy in Lagos, Titilayo Oshodi, joins us in the studio. Hi, Titilayo, good morning. Good to have you in the studio.
Morning. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so I mean, when you talk about the circular economy, obviously, is sustainability. That's the language of the world now. But sometimes it might sound so far away from an average Nigerian. So we want to bring it back home to our everyday life. Tell us about circular economy in practical terms for our everyday living.
So for everyday living, let's bring it back to some of the things that we do normally in the house. We would generate waste when we eat, and the leftovers, we pack them and throw them in the dustbin. We would turn up our taps in the toilet. If we do not have the right mechanism, you can leave that tap running, except you have to close it off. You can leave your light, on, in and out. There are ways that we can now start to manage the usage of those things, because the wastage of it is causing a lot more in terms of cost and in terms of the sustainability of emissions, So circular economy is a way of life of reusing, repurposing, remanufacturing, or redirecting the usage of things. Like you have said, it's a lot of but it's actually being able to look at what we use or what we enjoy with the end in view. For instance, our clothing, our plastics, our tires, our e-waste, the machines, the equipment that we use. Circular economy brings to bear how you can repurpose or reuse or recycle or remodel these items so that they're not ending up in the landfills and ultimately degenerating in thousands of years that actually accrue to the emissions, the carbon emissions that seems to be affecting our climate as of today. So that's
I think an interesting part, especially at this time in Nigeria, is you talked about how that can help reduce cost of living, for instance, the lights, but getting it into the mind, I think, is another thing, because we know, obviously, like countries like the UK, where you know that your light bill is going to directly reflect your usage. You don't need anybody to remind you. When you pay for the first week or the first month, you remind yourself. But how do we get to that point here in Nigeria?
So for us in Nigeria, we're a very peculiar society because a lot of things have been provided en masse for us in so many ways, or whatever it is that we have that sense that we have everything provided for us. Like you have said, because there are institutional mechanisms and infrastructure are based on a monetized basis, people are very clear, they're very dimensional, and they're very intentional about the usage. In Nigeria, we need to get on that journey, on that track of changing behavior. And one of the things that we have been able to identify is that we need to start to incentivize people to get to understand that there are benefits that are available or that are inherent in the waste that they generate. So in letting people know that your plastics can actually be exchanged, you can have them through a grand metric system and you can get money in return for it. Or you can have it exchanged for any social amenity that is provided in Lagos. Some of the integration models or integration systems that are available within this administration is the platforms with LASRA that provides access to subsidy in transportation, through the cowrie card, subsidy through Lagos, the health insurance scheme, subsidy through even the Ministry of Education for tuition. So our mothers who are sitting at home, who are taking care of their children, who are the homemakers, and they generate waste through food, through plastic, through clothing, can actually begin to manage the usage of these items.
Perhaps you should tell us how people can key into that.
Well, so there are already business membership organizations who are already working in that space. So they're already creating the ecosystems. And one of our jobs is right now to start to deliberately and strategically position these business membership organizations in communities, but first and foremost, we need to start to sensitize people to say, listen, start harvesting your waste. Do not throw them away. Do not dispose of them irresponsibly. You can have them in exchange for value, whatever it is that you want. And we've started with that communication, that community trail to communicate these values to them.
So, as a parent, maybe a woman in the house, the children, you talked about the issue of school fees,
yes.
The crown card?
Yeah, cowrie card.
Cowrie, thank you. The cowrie card.
With the Ministry of Transport.
Showing my ignorance on there, yes. The cowrie card.
Yes.
Do I have to put my plastics in bins or special bins to access that? How exactly can I do that?
So if you know that LOMA already had started with this sensitization and integration system, driving households, even through schools, secondary schools and primary schools, to say that there are bins that are labeled in color codes, and these bins have different purposes. They have different components that you should harvest them in. So there's a place for paper, there's a place for plastic, there's a place for organic waste, right? So at home, at the household level, at source, people are encouraged to start to sort their items, their waste, especially those that they know that they can hand over either to the PSP. Those are the people who come with the trucks, those that are come, even the organic ones right now. We're beginning to find a way to create some waste valorization model so that people can exchange their organic waste. So we're going into schools, we're going into communities, because we also understand that children are very, very great influencers. If they get to hear from their teacher that they can earn money, they can earn, some form of reward for the plastics that they bring, they can go back home and spread the word to their parents as well.
So do you have a length of time people have to do it for, or when the PSP comes to my house and I give them a bin, do I have to register, models like that?
So I don't think that the PSP have that model, but I think that because we're beginning to populate not just the PSP angle of it, but we're beginning to develop businesses. We have what we call a EBN, a business network, where we're beginning to harness the scalability, the operations of business organizations that already have started to pool, different households and different communities to let them know that they can come and collect their plastics for them. So if you have, for instance, 1 kilogram of plastics is in exchange for 600 Naira right now. So if we go to the communities, especially the vulnerable or the rural communities, and drive that kind of communication and sensitivity to say, just put them aside, you will have people who will come and, they will connect with you. These are the sort of network that we're trying to establish within our rural communities.
Yeah, it sounds like something that will sell in Lagos. I mean, direct incentive for, managing your waste properly. And I'm sure we'll get updates on that in due course.
Yes, we're working on that.
Thank you so much. Special Advisor, Climate Change and Circular Economy in Lagos State. This is Naira. Thank you for your time. I wish you the best.
Thank you very much.
All right, so that's it. It's a direct incentive for you to manage your waste. I guess it's good enough for us to be part of it. We're heading back to the Sunrise Daily Studio. Don't be afraid of that. But let's just look at the numbers for yesterday right there and see we lost that intraday green that we had at during Business Incorporated yesterday. So we saw the market drop. I lost even the 98,000 that Anita was so excited about. Now at 97, that's what we closed with yesterday. 55.5 trillion Naira. We still see the market, the fugas still getting profits, profit taking still happening on them. But oil and gas is looking really good now. Might be too late for you to get it. Maybe just wait for another chance. We'll give you updates, fresh figures, intraday figures at 1 p.m. during Business Incorporated. I'll be back with Anita Edets. Let's head back to the Sunrise Daily Studio.